Congratulations on your grant of clemency from President Obama. I am the project manager of Clemency Project 2014, Cynthia Roseberry. I'm thrilled for you and your loved ones. I know you are most deserving of this second chance. I also suspect that you know others who are as well. You were the one who was chosen, and I hope you'll take a moment to be grateful. While you have overcome a number of obstacles, the road ahead will have its difficulties. We've prepared these materials for you to assist you with identifying the challenges you may face and to identify where you can get help when you face them. I hope you'll use these materials for your development and your success. Like President Obama, I believe in you. The blood that runs through your veins carries the DNA of survivors. By your birthright, you are a survivor. I believe in you, but the question is, do you believe in yourself? I believe that you're more than a survivor and that you will conquer all of the obstacles ahead of you. Congratulations.
There is a very good chance that if you are viewing this video program, you are one of more than 1,000 federal prisoners whose sentences were commuted by President Barack Obama. First of all, congratulations and welcome home. My name is Norman Reamer. I'm the Executive Director of the National Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers, and before that I was privileged to be a criminal defense lawyer myself for many, many years. Here at NACDL, we have been proud to partner with the American Bar Association's Criminal Justice Section, the American Civil Liberties Union, Families Against Mandatory Minimums, and many federal and community public defenders to form Clemency Project 2014. Our goal was to try to assist as many federal prisoners as possible in trying to qualify for the clemency initiative launched by President Obama. We know that getting clemency was only part of the struggle. Now comes the next part of that struggle for many of you, which is the struggle to rebuild your lives and to take advantage of this second chance. We know that there are many problems and challenges that you will face as a result of having spent far too many years in a federal prison. This program is designed to help you meet those challenges and make the most of this second chance that you have been given. We want you to succeed. We want you to succeed for yourselves, for your families, for your friends, and for your communities. But we also want you to succeed for posterity. We want presidents and governors for all time to recognize that there is no shame, no risk, and no reason not to give people a second chance. We wish you every success.
Greetings. My name is Nikichi Taifa, and I am Advocacy Director for Criminal Justice for the Open Society Foundations, and I'm the convener of the Justice Roundtable Coalition. On behalf of the advocacy community that work very hard on issues of clemency and criminal justice reform, we are thrilled to welcome you home and back to our communities. We need you to know that you are a special part of history, and you can and must make a difference. Use all of the resources that you are being provided as part of your Making a Difference arsenal. You are the pipeline, not to prison, but to the future. Now, I'm not promising that your reentry journey will be easy, but whenever times are hard, whenever you feel stumped, I want you to persevere and remember the words of the great freedom leader Harriet Tubman as she led over 300 people out of enslavement. She said, if you hear the dogs, keep going. If you see the torches in the woods, keep going. If they're shouting after you, keep going. Don't ever stop. Keep going. If you want that taste of freedom, keep going, keep going, keep going. Persevere, I say. I know that you're going to make us proud. We're going to see you at the top. Congratulations.
Hi, my name is Dr. Ife Tayo Ojelade, and I'm the author of your text, Sacred Journey, a workbook for healing trauma. And this particular project is actually part of a larger series that I have done, specifically looking on different aspects of trauma. And I'm going to admit that I cannot take credit for this particular project. It has been funded by a couple of different sources. One is the Foundation for an Open Society, and the other one is the Foundation for Criminal Justice. And this is actually the brainchild of Cynthia Roseberry, who is the director of the Clemency Project. And she had this idea to make sure that individuals that had been released through President Obama's initiative on the Clemency Project would also be able to be supported if they had had some traumatic experiences while incarcerated. Thus, we have this project. And it really comes in three parts. One is the workbook, and if you're looking at this video, that means that you've signed up for the project and that you have received the workbook. The second part is this whole video series that you're seeing. And then the final part is the website. And if you haven't done so already, I invite you to go onto the website. It's www.lightbeforethetunnel.com. Again, light, L-I-G-H-T, the letter B, the number 4, thetunnel.com. The website has some really good information on there. So if you decide after reading the workbook that you want to connect with a therapist, there's some resources to be able to help you to connect with a therapist. The other thing that the website has is a feeling list, and that list is also repeated in the book, but then also it has a lot of activities. A lot of those activities are stress management activities, and they're mostly free or low cost activities. And so there's a ton of information on there, so I definitely invite you to be able to look at the website. And then finally, if you're looking for a therapist or looking for some extra resources or support and you cannot find those resources, feel free to call us and we'll connect you with some local resources. The number is 202-930-0183. I hope you enjoy this series. Hi, this is Dr. Ifeataya Ojelade again, and this is my first video in this series, and what I want to specifically do is talk about the types of trauma that there are. When you read the book, I'm listing specific traumas, and I'm looking specifically at child abuse and abuse that you may have experienced as an adult, and particularly if you were incarcerated for a long period of time, you've probably been traumatized by that experience, by seeing violence within the prison system or having violence committed against you, or sometimes even some people having in survival mode that they have to commit violent acts. And so those are all traumatizing experiences, but I want to really stretch beyond that because there are more things that can traumatize people. And if you remember from the book, one of the things that I do is define trauma, and in this video series you'll hear it defined over and over again. So I'm specifically defining trauma as any event that has an impact on the safety and security of yourself, your family, and community. Again, it's an impact on yourself, your family, and your community. So obviously, abuse in childhood, that's an impact on the safety and security of yourself. And so that's a traumatic experience. Also, if you're witnessing a violent act against someone or having a violent act as an adult against you, that is a traumatic experience. Or if you're committing a violent act, that's a traumatizing experience, obviously for the other person, but then for you also. Then one of the things that people often miss is substance use. So substance use puts you at risk in a couple of different ways. If you're using drugs or excessive amounts of alcohol, or even if you're taking pills, pain pills, things like that, then what can happen is that people put themselves in really dangerous situations, and as a result of those dangerous situations that they can be traumatized. This is particularly true with women who may put themselves in dangerous situations in order to continue using drugs. On the flip side of that, which people often miss, is the idea of children that are traumatized. So children that are growing up in environments where their parents can't take care of them, they may be focused on using drugs rather than caring for their children. That is a traumatizing experience in and of itself. And oftentimes when I'm working with people, they don't realize that having grown up in an environment where your parents are not there and taking care of you because they're using drugs has a huge impact on you. Another traumatizing experience that is the common one that people think about is obviously war. If we look at this country within the United States, there are several wars that in recent memory that the United States has been involved in. And when you have people that go and they're involved in those wars, even if people think that they're for right reasons, right or wrong, that impacts that individual person. And so when that person goes to war and they come back home, they're impacted not only for themselves, but they're going to impact their family, their spouse, and their children. And so overall, we have to be able to look at those things and understand the ongoing impact of making choices to go to war. The next thing that I would say is a traumatizing experience is if you grow up in unsafe neighborhoods. I grew up in South Central Los Angeles, and I feel like I was fortunate that I didn't experience a lot of the stereotypical negativity that lots of people had growing up in that environment. But if you're in a dangerous neighborhood, if people are shooting, if you can't get home from school without having to fight, if there's lots of gang activity, if the police are always around and you don't feel safe because you don't know if you may be shot by the police, those are all things to be able to think about, because overall that is a threat to yourself, your family, and your community. The next one that I'll talk about is forced migration. And I want to be able to define what forced migration is, because most people don't think about this. So if we think about forced migrations, it can happen in a couple of different ways. And we've known that historically, particularly in terms of this country. A forced migration can be something like the transatlantic slave trade, when we look at my ancestors and being forced to forcibly taken from their home and taken to a different country and forced to work. That's one way historically of forced migrations. Another forced migration is if we look at the indigenous people of this country. So we look at Native Americans and them having the land, and then some other people coming and occupying that land and then forcing them off their land and then forcing them to migrate to different areas. One of the big migrations that we can think about is the Trail of Tears. Those things are traumatizing experiences. Now let's move it kind of to current day. And current day forced migrations can be if you're in war-torn areas or areas where there's not, you don't have safety and security, or you don't have food or money to be able to support your family. And then those are economic forced migrations. And so just imagine for yourself, if you grow up in a particular community, in a particular environment, and you are enjoying the life that you have, and then all of a sudden a war breaks out, or there's no more food, or people can no longer earn an income, and you're forced to go to a different country, and then you can no longer return to your country and no longer see your family again. Think about the overall impact of something like that happening. Two more things that I'll talk about. One is neglect. And that can seem like this kind of big word, and sometimes people are not really clear how to define neglect. And really, when we look at neglect, we have to think about what are the basic things that everybody is supposed to have. All people deserve to have love, food, clothing, and shelter. Those are basic needs that everybody should have: food, clothing, shelter, and love. And so if you don't have those things, if someone is taking those things away from you, and particularly if you're a small child, or if you're an elderly person, you're vulnerable for some other reason, then that has an impact on you, and that is neglectful behavior, and overall that can be a traumatizing experience. The final thing that I will talk about is I want to go back to the idea of incarceration as being a traumatizing experience. When we look overall, and people will go back and forth depending on what side of the aisle they're on in terms of like really enforcing criminal justice laws, or people that are more focused on reform, people argue back and forth of whether or not incarceration is a traumatizing experience. One of the things that I think about all the time is that we are locking human beings in a cage. If you lock someone in a cage over long periods of time, and they have limited healthy social interactions, and particularly if that person is put in solitary confinement for long periods of time, that is going to ultimately impact someone's mental health. So we've seen this in a number of ways, and there's been a number of studies. One of the most famous studies is the Stanford prison experiment that was supposed to last for 2 weeks, and it actually only lasted for 6 days. And these were all students in the study, and the students were either assigned a role of being incarcerated or they were part of the guards in the prison. And everybody completely fell apart during that study psychologically, and so they had to stop the study. And when we look at that particular study, it tells us a lot about the process of incarceration and this dehumanizing process of putting people in a cage, from the perspective of people that are actually locked in the cage as a result of committing a crime, but then also people that are responsible for guarding that cage also. So I'm hoping this is helpful in terms of being able to understand some of the different types of traumatizing experiences. Thanks. The last thing that we'll talk about is communication. And this is something that everybody needs help with, because it's not like in school we learn how to communicate effectively with people. The first thing that you need to do if you're thinking about communicating something is you have to get clear on what it is that you want. I remember when I was in college and one of my supervisors would ask me all the time, what do you need from me? And I would get actually upset about it. And I remember a couple times crying because she kept asking me, what do I need? Because I wasn't clear what it was that I needed from her. So before you can communicate with anybody, you have to be really clear. What is it that you want from that other person? And once you get clear about what it is that you want, then you have to be able to tell that person. You cannot expect people to read your minds. And I always tell women this in particular, because women tend to think that men can read their minds, and women and men communicate in very different ways. And so men cannot read your mind, ladies. If you have something that you want, you have to be able to tell the person that you're communicating with. So in order to be able to communicate clearly, you have to make sure that you're not trying to manipulate the person or you're trying to guilt the person to get something from them. You just want to be clear on, this is the thing that I want from you. I want X, and not put the person down or try to beat the person up, but just be clear on that one thing that it is that you need, and don't ask for multiple things at one time. And now once you ask somebody for what it is that you need from them, just be clear that you have a right to ask, but they also have a right not to give it to you. So just because you are communicating clearly what it is that you need doesn't mean that person's going to give it to you back. So I hope that helps in terms of just a few tips on communication. Hi, my name is Dr. Ife Tayo Ojelade, and I'm the author of your text, Sacred Journey, and I'm here with my colleague, Dr. Kevin Washington, and we're going to talk about some of the concepts in the workbook that you have. And what we want to do is really extend the conversation. Dr. Washington is a licensed psychologist just like myself, and he specializes in working with African American couples and then also in trauma and trauma recovery. And so that's part of the conversation we're going to go into today. So we're going to jump right in. Dr. Washington, one of the things that I want to talk to you about is the concept of defining trauma. I know for myself and in the book, I define trauma as any type of threat to yourself, your family, and community. I'm wondering how you define trauma.
So when we talk about trauma, we think about a disaster, something that is a disruption to how we function. And so in the context of psychology, trauma is defined as something that interferes with your psyche, your inner being, and something that disrupts your normal flow, your activities. And that could come in the form of some natural disaster, some physical harm or threat. It could come in some form of even psychological debilitating thoughts that one may have. And so trauma is something that interferes with your inner workings, how you actually will normally function on a day-to-day basis.
What do you mean by debilitating thoughts?
Thoughts that one is not good enough. Thoughts that things that have happened that you've been told over the years about not being something, not being tall enough, not being short enough, being too much, too big, think you're too smart. So those thoughts are actually traumatizing to one's being because they were given to you, or given to us in a spirit of hurt and harm, and they disrupt our normal flow of activities. And these things actually are some of the most traumatizing experiences that humans can actually have, because we carry those scars with us for life. They come up periodically with certain experiences that actually occur. So we think about trauma as a disruption, again, to the inner beings of a person. As in medicine, they think about trauma as something that disrupts the body, the flow, a broken arm or a limb. And that's where the term really comes from, is looking at medicine and trauma. But in this case, we can't see the physical trauma that is psychological. We see it, or we experience it from the encounter. And the only thing that we really know for sure is how we feel, what is on the inside of us. And so that carries with it this idea of when the inner being is able to express itself in its most positive manner, it is able to be expansive and to do what it was really created to do. But when it is hindered from doing that through trauma, again, physical rape, violation of humanity, then that is when it's disallowed from doing it. That's when we end up with the hurt and pain and anguish that comes out, and we know that then is what we call trauma.
So it's interesting what you're saying, because I wonder, sometimes people will say that physical trauma is like worse than sexual trauma, which is worse than verbal abuse or trauma. Would you say one is worse than the other?
I would suggest that trauma, when it occurs and it disrupts your being, it is trauma. I would think that the spiritual injury or the internal trauma as caused through words has a long-lasting effect. We can see the damage that's caused by physical trauma. We see the broken arm or the black eye or the broken jaw or the tooth that is out, but you do not see what happens on the inside. You experience that. And what happens is that hurt people. And so the trauma has the capacity to be recapitulated or to be regenerated or to have a life of its own where it becomes something that is passed down from generation to generation. So I would suggest then that internal trauma has a long-lasting effect, and it is something that we must attend to at all times.
Okay, but is one worse than the other?
Well, we get into qualifying as a sense, say which one is worse. I'm suggesting that one has a longer-lasting effect than the other. The broken arm can be mended. You have a scar that is there. You're reminded of the injury when you see the scar, but you don't see that spiritual or internal scar. But things can come along and disrupt you, and you have some similar experiences again. So I would suggest that the more challenging trauma is the one that is the internal one. See, even when somebody has an accident, for example, even though the arm may be broken and it mends, they still have the internal scar of what took place. So they rehearse that accident over and over again in their heads, and that's the idea of trauma or PTSD, the post-traumatic stress disorder. So you talk about the trauma being psychological. So the most serious trauma, I think, for me to think about, and it's kind of if you survive the physical. That's why I don't want to say which one is worse. If you survive the physical, then it's the psychological one that has to be done.
So it sounds like what you're saying is that, like, you can have this physical trauma, like you can have a car accident, a broken bone, and that part of it, the physical part, can be healed, but then the long-lasting psychological effects has a larger impact.
Yes.
Okay, because it'll linger.
It lingers.
Got it. So why is it important for people to recognize whether or not they're traumatized?
Well, what happens is that as the body is able to heal, amend itself from some disruption, psychologically we do some of the same things. When there's a brain injury, people often do not recall the event that happened right before, during the particular brain injury process. They can recall some things that happened, events that happened before and afterwards, but when the brain injury occurred, there is very little remembrance of that. That happens on a psychic level as well, and so people learn to survive in the process of being traumatized. So it's like trying to tell a fish what water is, where you just try to, you keep adjusting and adapting and adjusting and adapting, and at a certain point you just simply are existing in a traumatized state and don't know that it is really something that is causing you harm in relationships. It causes you harm in how you function in your daily activities, work and school and other things, and so performance, because it begins to impact the limbic system, the brain system, the executive function, how we can think about things and remember and recall things. And so we exist in a traumatized state, which means we stay in this fight or fight mechanism where we are in survival mode perpetually, because we are trying to avoid one more traumatizing experience. And so we're not able to build, construct, to think, to expand, that we simply are protecting and fighting, and we're in a defensive mode, and so in survival mode, and that's a very dangerous spot to be in.
And I tell my clients that all the time, because I'll have clients that come in and they don't recognize they've been traumatized, but then I tell them that you can see it in their relationships. You can see in their relationship with themselves, because they may be using drugs or eating too much or not exercising, not caring for themselves. And then you can see it in their relationships with their children and their family. Lots of times I work with women that have these issues over and over again with people in their lives, and they're always seeing that there's a problem with everybody else. And I'm like, no, that's an example of the trauma, is because you keep recreating the same traumatizing events over and over again. And we're going to come back to that in a second, because I'm always curious about like why people recreate traumatic events over and over again. So we're going to talk about, I want to shift the gears and talk specifically about the healing process. And I'm wondering if you think talk therapy is the only way to actually be able to begin healing.
So anytime we talk about the only way, we're already in trouble.
Okay.
Right?
All right.
So we have to understand that there are multifaceted ways of dealing with very diverse challenges. And so talk therapy is one way to be able to bring the event to the level of words, to be able to articulate it, is one way of doing it. But there may be ways that you bring it to words that are not always in talk therapy. It could happen in the artistic expression of spoken word, even though it's word, but it's not talk therapy. So you can write a poem, or you can create a song, and those are moments where you can begin to recognize some challenges that you may be having internally, the idea of a trauma. So many songs have been written out of traumas that people have encountered. So we like to use spoken word. We like to talk about music, and I use drumming as a modality for releasing certain dynamics of trauma, because when you talk about rhythm and vibration, you begin to change the algorithms within the brain. And remember, the brain is beginning to respond to the trauma and is beginning to adjust and shift. And so when you talk about using vibration and rhythm, you're beginning to shift how the algorithms function, and that is also a way to relieve yourself. Now, you haven't talked about what the traumatic experience is, but you have begun to engage in a process by which the disruption that the traumatizing experience is causing is now being shifted.
Wait, I want to interrupt you for a second. You said a word, and I want to make sure that everybody gets. You said algorithm. Explain what the algorithm is.
So algorithm is that everything that we do is through vibrations. And so everything is vibrating at some level. That's what physicists tell us. And so we recognize that there are certain ways that the body functions. So the algorithms, the brain waves, are always creating things. It's brain waves. At a certain point, we feel sleepy, we feel awake, alert. Those are brain waves. Those are algorithms within the brain. But also, they allow us to be spontaneous at sometimes, happy at sometimes, to be lethargic or sad at sometimes. And we don't always know why. And so, when one has been traumatized, they exist again in this fight or flight mechanism space. So there's so the amygdala is activated, the so-called limbic system, and that is the reptilian brain. That is the first part of the brain that developed. It controls breathing, it controls walking, and those kind of things. And so it also deals with survival. And so when one is stuck in that state of survival, then the algorithms are on hyper alert, hyper vigilant, defensiveness. And so you talk about people recreating trauma in their lives, and oftentimes because they're in this vibratory space of being defensive or on the attack, I'm going to get you before you get me, kind of process. Then they exist in this zone of always waiting for the next bad thing to happen. But the drumming moves you from that particular space of the limbic system, and it moves you into a space of creativity. So it moves you from the back of the brain to the front of the brain. And so does spoken word. The idea of creativity, creating something, moves you from survival to being expansive. Music does that. Dance is also another one of those things, because much of our trauma can get locked into our muscles, meaning that when we are stressed, our shoulders may become tense, our body becomes tight, but also when we've been traumatized, a certain part of the body has been mostly disrupted. So people who have been violated sexually, then that part of the body has a certain experience. I had one person who did not like individuals to walk, older males to walk behind her. And that is because when she was violated by someone, the person came to her from behind. So automatically her body had a visceral response, survival mechanism to people, older men walking behind her. What movement did for her is allowed her to be able to engage in dance or rhythm or flow that sometimes a dancer may pass behind her, and she was able to release that particular tension caused by the someone being behind her that may cause her harm. And then the body was able to flow because neurochemicals began to flow, and it changed again the algorithms within the brain.
So you said two things that I wanted to touch on. One was when you're talking about the algorithms in the brain and that kind of fight or flight response. In the limbic system or the amygdala, I know that one thing that happens is if you're in a dangerous situation, that your body releases cortisol, and that cortisol is going to allow your muscles to get longer. It allows you to release fluid so you can flee from that situation or you can fight that situation. And one of the things that happens is when you get traumatized over and over and over again is that you always are having that cortisol release. And what we know is that cortisol getting released over and over again is going to make you stressed, and it's going to make you gain weight, and it's really going to have this negative impact on your body because it starts tearing down the muscles in your body. And so what I was explaining to my clients is if you're continuously having your amygdala basically triggered, then your body gets used to always having that cortisol release. And so then when things are calm, guess what people do? They go and find chaos to create, because they're used to their brain. Yeah. Yes. And so literally it's like your body gets addicted to drama and chaos. And so you have to shift your body. And what you're talking about is because your body is remembering the trauma, so it's not just our brain, it's like overall our physical body is remembering the trauma, is that drumming or dance, or, and I would even say yoga, because that's something that I do a lot. Deep breathing, those things actually allow you to be able to shift your body so you can get your brain and your body kind of on track, so you stop being so addicted to creating drama and chaos in your life.
And one of the things tied to that is a very powerful point is that the cortisol has to be burned off. It does not just simply leave. It has to be burned, has to be utilized, because remember, as you said, the muscles become elongated. It is there for usage. And so if we don't use it, for example, and we feel more exhausted, so we feel, oh, I'm tired. But in reality, the chemicals are in your system. You may actually go take a nap, and so it's not being used, which makes you then, you're hyper alert. You're on. You're ready to do something. And so what movement does is that it allows you to be able to release some of those the cortisol. But when the cortisol is not released, right, it builds up. Not only does it cause weight gain, but remember you mentioned the digestive process. The GI tract has also lost a lot of sugars, and so the arms need sugars to move. And so all of a sudden, the body says, "Look, even though we're not in this moment, I need to replenish." And so the body desires or craves simple sugars. That is in the form of fatty foods, donuts, honey buns, ice cream, those kind of things. And so that is a part of the weight gain process. The cortisol spread in men is one thing, and a lot of that is
in women too.
Women, right? And it happens in different ways in women. Women often in the arms and the thighs. Men right in the midsection early on. And what happens is that the body is craving fats and sugars and so that contributes to obesity, and then but also cortisol, if it's not utilized in the body, causes plaque to build up in the arteries, which then creates this condition of blood pressure, because you have to press through that particular coagulation or the plaques, and then over a period of time the plaque causes blockage, and now you have coronary heart disease, right? So you have high blood pressure, you have heart attack. Also the cortisol, if not released properly, does things around the adrenal gland or the renal system or the kidneys, and then you end up with kidney failure, you end up with diabetes. And all these things are part of a process out of which we can suggest that trauma or stress is the major contributor.
Okay. I want to talk about food, because I know a lot of times if we talk about Latinos, if we talk about African Americans, even indigenous people in this country, we kind of give food a bad rap in terms of healing, because we think of like all the negative things, we eat fried food and sweets and all that kind of stuff. But I wonder also if there's a way for food to be used in a really healing capacity. I'll give you a story. One of the things that I always tell people, and I actually wrote this in another version of my book, is about my childhood. There's not a lot that I remember about my childhood that's very positive, except I remember that I grew up in this family with a ton of folks that were Creole. And on Thanksgiving and Christmas, we had gumbo. And there's always this experience of thinking about my early childhood and all the things that I didn't want to eat. They wanted me to eat meat, and I didn't want to eat that. I was focused on eating cheese or something else. And so there was lots of conversations, like pushing and pulls around food. But I remember this positive experience with gumbo. And when I left home at 15. When I left home, I thought I would never have it again. And then maybe about 5 or 6 years ago, I went to my cousin's house. And this is a cousin that's on the other side of my family. And she said she was making gumbo for Christmas. Now, I had had people's gumbo, and I was like, not.
That's right.
I mean, you know, like gumbo is like, yes.
Mm-hmm.
And my cousin made this pot of gumbo, and it reminded me of my childhood.
Mm-hmm.
And I was completely floored, because it was this positive memory that I had in things that weren't positive. And so what my cousin did this Christmas is she came to my house and she was like, I'm gonna teach you how to make gumbo. So we sat there for hours, because you know it take a minute to do it from scratch. And so we sat there for hours and we talked and we bonded, and my cousin taught me how to capture something from my childhood that was really positive. So I'm wondering if, and I felt like that was a healing experience for me, particularly because, like I said, I don't have lots of things that I remember that are positive, but that's one thing. And then particularly for a woman in my family to teach me how to do that thing, I thought was powerful. So would you say that there are spaces like that for healing?
You know, that's another good one, because there were 3 things that are very powerful. One was the relationship between you and the relative. That was a part of the healing, because remember, the idea that you mentioned is that there was something in the family that was disruptive to your being. And so the family member came in as a surrogate to help you to repair some of those things that had been disrupted, but also it was done in the context of something that you enjoyed, and you enjoyed the food. And so the food, or the gumbo, was this association made between something that is pleasurable in your life. I have a friend of mine who actually did the opposite just for a moment. He became a drug addict because he said that what he remembered is that the only time that his parents did not argue is when they were drunk. So he figured, well, that's what you do when you want to not argue. So we have these things that we associate with one another. And so that's a part of what you do, is that you make the association between that and the other. And inside of that is something else. Is that inside of the food there are chemicals that are also part of a feel-good moment. And so not only does it feel good to have food in the system, but certain spices create certain feelings, affects. And that's why we talk about chocolates for Valentine's, where the idea of aphrodisiac. There are certain chemicals within cocoa that can create certain emotions or contribute to those things. So when you talk about the gumbo is so important because in family, because when you look at the gumbo created by people of African origin who did not have a lot of resources, they pulled things together to create this thing called a gumbo. And what holds the gumbo together is the root. And the root is the substance of the gumbo. It's not whatever you put into it. If the root is not right, then everything else is out of order. And so if you want to look at it metaphorically, then the root is like the spirit. And if it's disrupted, then I don't care what you put into it, nothing is going to come. The gumbo is going to be jacked up. That's why I focus on gumbo that doesn't come out right, because the root is not right. And so it is a thing that holds everything together. And so what you understand is that people add in things like sassafras and other things. Those chemicals create certain feelings of joy, of peace, of calm. Rosemary, for example, has this calming effect. Garlic has a certain effect when in foods, and turmeric and curcumin. When you don't learn how to use those chemicals within foods, then you learn how to engage in healing the properties. That's why you go into a house and you smell food cooking, you have a good feeling, and because the smells, but also inside of the food is the process of the person releasing their energy to create the substance. So you can go get gumbo from a package, and it won't taste the same.
Package?
Yeah,
They have packaged gumbo?
yes, you can get.
I never heard of that.
Get a frozen containers.
Yeah, I'm not
Yes.
even seeing it.
Yeah,
Okay,
right.
anyway, go ahead.
You get it. You get it frozen, and it won't have the same effect as what was done for you by your family, because also inside of the food are not only the chemicals, but people give of themselves when they love you, right? And so we have to recognize that food can be a part of the healing process, rhythm drumming, and that's therapeutic as well. But it has to be done in context, right? It has to be done in a healing context. And the last point is that I had an experience where the best gumbo I ever had was done by my Aunt Eva May, and she was in Lake Charles, and so it was always exciting to go to her space. It didn't matter what her house looked like, right? What the kitchen looked like. We knew what came out of that kitchen, right, was going to be filled with goodness, because she was excited about her brother and his children coming to the space, and so she put so much energy in her, and her gumbo was better than my grandmother's gumbo, right? And that's like, how could the student be better than the teacher? But there was something about the relationship oftentimes between the brother and sister that was very different. And so her gumbo. Now my grandmother did some other stuff that was off the chart, but the gumbo, that was all Aunt Eva made. And again, it was love. And I'll tell you what happened 2 weeks ago is that her son, my cousin, called me, and it was all of that came back in a phone call that we had not talked, not because anything had happened, just we had not talked,
Right.
because of this family separated, and there was a healing that came not because of the gumbo, because of the association. And so he and I had a conversation about, yeah, Mama can make some good gumbo. Yeah, he said, well, you can make gumbo better than that was his sister, and so sister had died early in her life. So it was all a discussion around food and healing, and so I suggest to you then that healing can occur through talk, but it occurs through all these other modalities, because also trauma occurs through those various modalities as well.
Okay. Now, I always get this question from my clients about forgiveness. And I know in our society we have a predominantly kind of Judeo-Christian idea that in order to heal, you have to forgive. And I kind of push back on that with my clients and really get them to think about, like, what does forgiveness mean for them and whether or not they want to forgive, and talk about forgiveness as a choice for them and not to allow other people to pressure them. I wonder what you do when you're talking to clients and the idea of forgiveness comes up, specifically around if you've been raped or traumatized in some specific way, and then people are pressuring you to forgive the person that's done the harm. Actually, let's just kind of bring it kind of current day. So when, I don't even remember his name, and I'm not going to put him on this tape, but that guy that went and murdered all those African Americans in the church. And the immediate kind of response was about forgiveness. And I see that a lot in terms of African Americans. Things happen to us within our community, and the conversation is immediately about just forgive and kind of move forward. And I wonder how healing or therapeutic that is and how effective it is overall.
Forgive, as I look at it, is to release the hold that a thing has on you, right? So it's not to release the remembrance of the thing or the impact of the thing. It's to release how it is holding you in a certain space. So you have the capacity to forgive it from holding you hostage, because emotions hold us hostage. Anger, resentment, despair can keep us bound into a space, and we can't even move because emotionally, because we're so stuck in that space. So forgiveness then means to release the hold for me of what it has on our lives, but it does not ever for me means to disallow it. Don't think about how it was a disruption to your life, because that has to be always acknowledged. That's what we do. If we have a certain experience physically, we avoid certain things because it's like, hey, if you go there again, you may end up with this. So don't turn left, turn right, because when you turn left, you had an accident or what have you. Or eating certain foods. Certain foods make you nauseous. You don't eat those foods again. So there is a remembrance that takes place, but you don't hold on to the nauseous feeling of the food. You're able to give up its feeling on you, because if you thought about the food all the time, then you'd always be nauseous. So it is to release the hold that it has on you. That's what I think about, and I think that we have a very simplistic notion of just forgive and move forward. No, the issue is that the crime that you mentioned is a heinous crime. It carries with it a lot of anger, and I have all the rights to have feelings and emotions around that thing. What I refuse to do is allow that person's actions to keep me held up in a space where I'm in fight or flight and I'm killing myself. I'll say it this way: people die more from what's eating them than from what they're eating.
Right.
So I let that go, but I'm always in remembrance that it has been done.
So let's use an even more concrete example. So if you have someone that, let's say, is molested for years by their grandfather, and then they're releasing, so they don't get stuck, but then their family wants them to come to Thanksgiving where this grandfather is. Would you tell the client, yes, go, because you've forgiven now?
You would go back into that traumatizing experience because why are we going back? And that would bring
because
up,
it's family Thanksgiving, and
right.
So.
That would bring up those emotions. And I was just talking to someone about a particular celebrity that was violated in the church, and forced to stay. People laid hands on the person and asked her to forgive him. He sinned, all of that, and so this person never resolved whatever the issue was around that violation, and it was as if people minimized her true feelings. And so as a result, she became a drug addict, and not too long ago she died. Had very difficult behaviors with her in her life, with marriage and those kind of things. So the point is that the thing can hold you down. It is not necessarily a safe space to go into emotionally if you're in that space and you go back into those same feelings of being violated. And so it seemed in this case that family members are saying, I don't honor what you felt or what you experienced, which is now alienating the person further from, one, being our truth to themselves, but also part of the family, and that I'm honoring more the grandfather because he's more important than you. So now one has felt devalued, which brings a lot of emotion, and so all of this stuff comes up, and now that's the problem, and that's a challenge. So if a person is not in a space where they feel supported, they have resolve certain things within themselves, then by all means, you don't have to put yourself in a space where you're going to bring back up the things that made you uncomfortable. That's also trauma. It's traumatizing.
Okay. So that being the case, what could a family do to be supportive in a situation like that? Grandfather's coming to Thanksgiving, you got the person that he's molested, who's not coming to Thanksgiving. How should family members handle something like that?
And family must acknowledge that this is the reality. And people have the right to exist in these realities where they don't have to come into contact with one another, because the coming into contact is a disruption to one's being. It doesn't, because the idea to force people together and say that, okay, everything is hunky-dory, everything is good, and I haven't owned up to it. I've been violated, but I haven't said it's good, and I haven't said what's good about it. And even if I say it now, I may have a remembrance when I see it again or smell it again, like you did with the gumbo, that is uncomfortable. We need to acknowledge that. We do it through healing activities within families, but sometimes acknowledge the fact that they may not come together in the same space and have to do shifts. It is the respect of the being that is very important in this process. And so to suggest that I must do this, it disallows me from having my experience of what it means for me to be human.
So would you say then that family members should say, okay, maybe 1 year this person comes and next year the other person comes?
Or something like that, or or for Christmas you come and Thanksgiving they come, or make some shifts and adjustments. Families do it anyway, right? So
they do for other issues,
they do for other issues, but for this, they want to, especially when you talk about the issue of violation. But let somebody say something the wrong way, they will stay away from a family reunion or something for 10,
like
15, right.
Like, I ain't going back over there with them
Exactly.
people. Yeah.
Exactly. But for things like this, you want to not allow me to feel. And the thing they fall out about, oftentimes it's so minor. I had it happen in my family just recently. You mean to tell me you didn't say that? No, I didn't say that. I thought you said that. That's why I didn't. And that blew into this, and it was I thought you said, right? And so this is a real violation, deeply to someone's being, and you're going to make them come into the space because you feel that it's better. No, who's it really benefiting? Right?
So you're saying then that family members shouldn't be trying to force people back together.
Right. The issue is about promoting support and healing, instruction. And that's what I suggest that therapy is like. Therapy is like a cast to a broken bone. It allows for the structure for the bone to mend. It doesn't cause the healing. Family is supportive and can provide structure for further healing. But you do not force the thing to heal. You have to put the structure and allow it to begin to mend itself.
Then the other thing that I want to talk about is managing conflict. So, when people get home, they're going to be back in their family. People are going to expect them to kind of act normal. And conflict is going to come up. And so what are some suggestions that you have for our folks in terms of going back home, and then when conflict does arise, how do they manage that conflict?
Conflict often occurs because people have varying opinions or views on something. Something is done. Do I put 2 spoons of salt in here, or do I put 1 spoon? Although things happen when you come back into a family context. And so the issue is to understand what is the goal of the communication process. Is the goal to be able to understand and to compliment one another, or is the goal to be right and the person to be wrong? And many times when there are feelings that are there, emotions that are there, people go on the attack mode, and they want to be right, the other person has to be wrong. In reality, there are multiple rights and wrongs in almost every situation. I mean, there are things that happen because we don't always know what we've said or how it sounds, or what a person hears, or what it sounded like to them. All we know is what we intend. And the worst part of a relationship and a conflict is when people have intentions, and the intentions are not received well, and then that's where emotions come up.
So wait a minute, let me interrupt you. How do you know what someone else's intention is?
Right, and the idea is that we don't know what the other person's intention is. We just know what we think we know.
Okay.
And so
how do you find out?
So the issue around that is to begin to have a conversation. But what we do as human beings is that we begin to get into a position of defending ourselves and creating a situation where we have to be right. And so some suggest that we must speak without offending and listen without defending. And sometimes when a person has said something, we begin to go into defensive mode. I had a case recently where someone assumed that I made a move in a conversation because I was operating from male privilege, and I was a celebrity, and I was like, you've been here before, and it's like, no, I've never been to this event before. I did not feel I had privilege. I just came up because we were just talking, and the more I said what I said, the more they got stuck in. And you have privilege. It's like because and it's like, no, I don't know anybody here. I feel really alienated in this space because I don't know people. But her interpretation was I was doing what I was doing because of that. And so he was hearing from one spot. My point is that, and I was moving from one spot. And so there was a violation that I created, and there was an interpretation of something that was created, but nobody else interpreted it like that. But it was real for her, and it was real for me. And so we had to then begin to communicate, and the real issue was to slow down, to be able to hear positions. It didn't mean that we had to agree, but to stop and to hear what was happening. And so that was the movement, was not to get stuck in the business of being right. So I was trying to be right at the point. At a certain point, I was like, I didn't really mean this. Like, hold on, wait, I'm not going to get away with this. And then to ask her to be able to listen to what she's saying and what I'm saying, and to give back to her what she's saying. But conflict is a part of life. As a matter of fact, African proverb says to put people together is ask them to argue. So they will have disagreements.
So when I think of what you just said, just when I'm thinking of conflict and interpretation, I always talk about like not trying to read people's minds, particularly for women. I don't think that it's a good idea for women to try to read men's minds. Because it doesn't work. It doesn't. And so the thing that I'm always telling people is ask questions. Don't make an assumption just because someone says something. So if I say something to you, it doesn't mean the way that you heard it is the way that I intended it. And so what you're saying is that we both have to stop and listen to each other and be clear about what the other person is saying. Right. And I think that can be difficult in this society when we try to communicate.
Even asking to ask from a spot of humility. Many times we're asking and we're still attacking.
Got it.
Right? You understand what I'm saying? Or I'm responding and I'm still defending.
Right.
Even though I'm communicating with you, it's still battle. It just seems it's another form of battling. Almost like I'm thinking about capoeira now, right? It's a form of
back and forth.
Right, back and forth, right? It's dancing up here, but it's fighting preparation. So we have to recognize that sometimes we don't stop and release. And this person that I'm talking about has had some hurts, and some things that have happened, and I didn't get it until I happened to hear someone have a conversation about the person in another setting, and said this person is angry with them. It's like, oh, so it's not the issue of me. I just have to be collateral damage in the process. You follow me? So once I realized that it was collateral damage, it's like, okay, I own what I did to stir it up. However, the onus is on the person to not always attack in having an exchange, or to always end up in a defensive posture and fighting. So we have to look at communications, not only asking questions, but to ask out of humility, ask out of earnestness, ask like a child. Like, what does this really mean? Like children say, well, but why? Right? Just really getting to that point of that type of open communication is when we can begin to get to elevation.
Right. I think about that a lot in terms of when I'm working with trauma survivors, and they'll do like projection. They'll see stuff in other people, and I was working with this one woman, and she saw everybody as her parents had done a lot of stuff to really be wounding to her, and she saw everybody's actions in that same way. And then we were talking about her husband, and her husband didn't say something the right way or something, and she was looking at his behavior as intentional, and I kept trying to communicate to her, like, no, you have to recognize that's your wound. That's your early childhood wound, and you're projecting that on him. He was just, saying whatever it is that he was saying, and she didn't have a clear understanding of his intentions behind that, and so she was interpreting it in this negative way. And I think that is really destructive for relationships, because over time, and I tell women this all the time, men don't want to hear you just beating up on them all the time about every single thing. They just don't. Nobody wants to. Men or women don't want that to happen. And trauma survivors a lot of times will see everything through that traumatizing lens. So they interpret every single thing that happens to them as coming from this place of negativity. And when you stop and you listen and you ask questions, and you're coming from this place of humility like you talked about, I think it shifts the conversation and it makes things more open. And it gives you an opportunity to heal, because you can heal what the other person is saying.
That's true. That's true. And I was thinking when you said this idea of nobody wants to be traumatized, nobody wants to be attacked or beaten down. One of the things that happens with men define a lot in general, define themselves by what they do, right? They're physical. So men will come together. We will play ball together. We will fix a car together. We don't always just simply be together. We do things together. And so if you're attacking me around my doing, that's how I identify myself, then that causes some issues. And so women often deal with the issue of being. How are you treating me? One friend of mine's mother cooked some food, back to food, right? And she said, well, honey, do you like it? He said, I'm eating, ain't I? Right? And so he didn't answer the question, right? So as a psychologist, I had to back up and get mature and think about it and say, oh, he was defining it by his doing. I'm in the process of eating it.
So that means I like it.
I like it.
Got it.
And she wanted to know, how did it be? How's it making you feel? Do you like it? And to be affirmed. Now, were they wrong? Well, you know, at some level, I mean, he could have given a different response, and I agree with that. However, if you understand where it was coming from, you can begin to start to try to nurse that and move it into a space where people can actually be heard from their position. And so women can go to the bathroom together, men don't. Right?
Yeah, no,
it doesn't work because that's a different kind of moment. So my point is that these things are distinct about one another. So men can't understand, well, why they go to the bathroom together? So just you mentioned about mind reading. Mind reading can be dangerous because we often read from our perspective.
I think,
right?
like 99% of the time, we're reading from our perspective.
Right. So it's like, it don't make any sense. Why are you doing that? And so we have to understand that it is to move back and to become humble, because in the position of humility is when we can begin to actually grow. Right? And we can't grow if we're always right, and we don't grow if we feel like we're always wrong, and we can't experience growth if somebody's always wrong and another person's always right. So it's a matter of being able to do a dance, and to be able to respond accordingly. And I'm to dance. So in couples work, what is so amazing is like what helped me to do some healing work was beginning to learn. Chicago's stepping, right, and how stepping moves, and even taking up salsa, just understanding the basics of salsa, and understanding that there has to be communication, clear communication from the man to the woman in the dance.
And men always lead, and women have to follow, but not in a negative way. Mm-hmm. I think it forces you, as I just jumped in and interrupted you, but I'm always excited about salsa, because I think that traumatized people that are particularly wanting to be in control all the time, or feel disempowered, they need to learn salsa, because for men that just feel completely disempowered, to be in a leadership role is like, and if you're gonna dance salsa, you gotta step back, right? And the man has to be able to lead, and then women that want to kind of control everything because they're feeling like their world is out of control, they have to be able to hear that communication, and it's not a verbal communication, it's just through the dance, and they have to allow themselves to just let go in order to dance salsa. So sorry, I'm just excited about that.
I mean, that's salsa dance. So it wasn't the issue or line dance, or stepping. It wasn't that you took over. You engaged in the dance. There was a certain movement, and when the movement came, you did your movement in your style. And now we're back together in the dance. And for those people who are often uncomfortable with again, you said leading, or for me it was I don't always want to be the one telling you what to do, right? Because the issue is we learn to be complements to one another. So it was like I have to always do this, and I realized that if you don't communicate clearly, that was the idea, through hand gestures, through movement, body, then nothing can ever get done. So it wasn't an issue of submission; it was an issue of being complementary. That if I feel this, then I can go this way. And then when I go this way, he can go this way, right? And so you actually, in the movement, you give me the next movement that I can do, and then that's the sacred dance. So even that is healing there. That the communication is not one way; it's led, but it's always a dualistic process, because if you don't move properly, or move a certain way that's smooth, it's hard for me to even lead. Right? You follow me?
Oh, I get it. I totally
And then if I'm leading with a vague message, it's hard for you to do the dance. Right. But if I'm free in my movements and you're free in your movements, so everything is happening, the freedom then creates a very sacred dance. Same thing in relationships.
I think the key word that you said, and I think we should spend some time with it, is complementary. Because a lot of times, if I say something like that in terms of leadership and men in leadership, people again look at that from kind of Judeo-Christian perspective of men are the head of the households and they lead and they tell everybody what to do in this kind of dominant perspective, and then women should be in this place of submission and kind of barefoot and pregnant. And it's not really about that. It is, as African people, we understand this concept of complementary. So in order for me to exist, you have to exist, and vice versa. And that we have to be able to work together. So one person is not more valued than the other. That it's really this working together synergy, this relationship, this energy that connects us together.
Right. And conflict will happen, right? Things will bump together periodically. But we have to understand that the bumping is not the problem. And that's where we get stuck. That the issue is to create a process where we complement one another so that the bumping becomes smooth, and that we learn how not to bump the same way again. But too many times we get stuck on the bump. Why do you do that? Why do you move over this way? Why do you step on my feet? It's like, hold on. The real issue is to figure out what do we do to make sure that we don't do that move the same way again, right? And then that's the enhancement of one another. Well, I made that move because I assumed that you were going to do this. And when we realize that, it becomes a very beautiful piece. I had a coworker just last week who made a certain move, email communication about a certain activity, and male-female conversation. So she had made some other things happen on campus that I'd been working on for about a year or so. That I was like, well, this is odd. I've been working on this, and nobody moved with me like this, but she's coming and move forward. So that was kind of with me. So when she made another move on the email, it was like, okay, she's really taking over some stuff, and so we were not going to meet because she could not meet with this larger group. So we were trying to reschedule. Then she wrote that she was going to be able to come in later for the meeting. Well, after we all agreed that we couldn't meet because she couldn't be there, it seemed like she was undermining the entire process. Now, mind you, I had other stuff going packaged in my head. Another person had some other stuff packaged in their head, and that's how I heard about the event. And so when I communicated with the person, she was defensive, and I was defensive. And then I said something. I said, well, I would never try to move and do something without you being a part of the process. She then shifted and said, well, the reason I was trying to adjust the cover because I didn't want to hold the group up. I was trying to accommodate. Now, if we got stuck in our positions, right?
You wouldn't have been able to
We would have never ever heard that, right? We would have had a blow up and couldn't get along as colleagues, and we were fighting over something that was really not the truth. The truth was she was trying to help, but she was trying to compliment, and we were trying to compliment. And it seemed like she was not complimenting, but in reality she was, and she realized that trying to compliment at that time was a disruption, and then we had to figure out how to change the process, and as a result, or found up from that, the date actually changed from the event. So now we had a blow up about the event that actually moved anyway, turned out the date. So that's a good example, I think, of how people can often miss one another, even around good intentions.
Right.
Mm-hmm. My name is Dr. Kevin Washington. And today we'll talk about male-female dynamics. One of the most fulfilling aspects of life is for one to have a relationship with someone. And in that relationship, they're able to be enhanced. They become a better self. Male-female dynamics means that one is engaged in a process of becoming a better person through the contact of having someone else that is their complement. A complement is something that completes them or something that enhances them. And so we talk about male-female dynamics. There are things that happen that we must recognize that happen in the form of communication. How do we talk to one another? How do we be? How do we become? And what it is that we're trying to become as we engage with one another. So today we'll talk a little bit about this idea of being and becoming in the context of a relationship. First of all, the idea of being is that when you have male signifies this idea that is distinct from another thing called female. So female and male actually are complements, that they are parts of one another. And that you do not have a male, actually, if they're all things called male in one space. You don't have a female until the other one enters into that space. But there is this idea of the beauty of being defined in the context of the other that is so powerful. So when we talk about male-female dynamics, the question becomes, what is it about a woman that makes a man be a better man? What is it about a man that makes a woman be and become a better woman? And so in the context of male-female dynamics, we must recognize that we come together to make one another better at whatever it is that we've been created to become. So male-female complementarity deals with this issue of understanding how something in me as a man facilitates the growth and development of others. And so in some societies, in one society in Africa, as a matter of fact, talks about women being vibration and men being rhythm. That the rhythm is counted. It is very precise, and it is something that you can predict. Vibration is like the wind. It is there, it's moving, it's not as predictable. But in reality, you don't have music without rhythm and vibration. You don't have dance, you don't have song, you don't have life without both rhythm and vibration. So they say that the rhythm and the vibration actually bring out the thing called life. And so when we talk about the idea of compliments, we say that something happens in a relationship that makes me better. We have to be able to stop and receive that gift from one another. That gift of being is, what is it about this person I need at this time? Asking that question is very critical. What is it about this person that makes me a better person? That's also critical. And what is it that I'm trying to become, or what is it that I am to become in my life is also critical. And so many times we must understand that people come into our lives for a season, a reason, or a lifetime. And the season may actually be for a time period to bring out something. The reason is for a function, and oftentimes for a lifetime is for a perpetuity, that is the idea that it will continue. So we have to ask the question, what is it about this person, this relationship that needs to be attended to? And so we will get the messages that we need to get from one another. The challenge sometimes is that we don't always want to grow in the manner that we need to grow. And so that's when we often have conflicts in a relationship, when somebody is challenging us to grow to the next level. So the next time you find yourself in a relationship where you find this idea of conflict existing, think about this question of, what is it that I'm being now forced to grow into? Or what am I being forced to let go of? Why is it happening at this time? And what is it that's going to happen as a result of me going into this new space where I am a new being? So male-female dynamics suggests then that one is understanding that there's one person to make another person a better person. In thinking about male-female dynamics in the context of being incarcerated, one must recognize that there has been a shifting that has taken place in one's household or in one's space that they have left. That there's a new person returning to a new relationship, a new person returning into a new dynamic, a new person returning to something that has learned to exist without the other being present. And that is a very difficult process for one to reintegrate into, because one has come up with these ideas as to what they think is going to happen when they return. One assumes that the community is going to receive them and they're going to move into this space where there's going to be a celebration. But in reality, the system has learned to function without the incarcerated person being present. So when we talk about dynamics, we must understand that there has to be a shifting, a change, a letting go, a submission, but also a holding on to, an elevation, and a pull towards. What I mean is that there has to be a submission to suggest that there is something that's going to happen, that somebody's not going to always receive the incarcerated person immediately in the community. Also, the submission is that the person, the female, has to be able to, in the case of a male or female, the female has to be able to receive this incarcerated person as a person who is desiring to come back into the house and to be a participant. A part of what happens with men is that we define ourselves by what it is that we do. And so we have to be received so that we can actually do and be the things that makes us feel like men. Which means that we are dependent upon something else allowing us or helping us or showing us what it is that we can do in a space to become more fulfilling. So when we talk about reintegration back into the family after incarceration, we must recognize that there is a process of submission, receiving, but also a process of holding on to and attaching to become knowledgeable of what it is that's needed to be able to become better. By that, what I'm suggesting is that the system has to be able to understand that the incarcerated person has had some experiences that may actually make the system function in a very different way, maybe even more efficiently. But if it's rejecting of the person, then it misses something that it actually can help it to do a better role or function for the system to actually operate better. A man comes back into a community, the house, and he doesn't have employment, right? There's no job there because many times people do not want to hire somebody who's been incarcerated. Then you have a part of one's manhood being challenged, because the idea of doing is manhood. And also the system is saying, look, you haven't been here anyway, and you're still not doing anything. And so it becomes difficult to feel really like a man, or to have this idea of maleness in a household. So it is having a chance to readjust to what it means to be a man under these conditions. How do you accept the condition under which you find yourself? That is the first step, to accept, to recognize that this is what has happened. I have been incarcerated, I've moved away from this space, and that people have certain perceptions of me, and they have a perspective out of which they are going to judge me, and that is a reality. And the reality is also that what they think of me is not really the truth and the totality of who I am. And so it is important to be persistent and to be patient, to understand how to be powerful. So you have to be persistent to keep moving forward. You have to understand to be patient because things will take some time, and understand that in all of this comes your real power to overcome any obstacle that you've encountered. The incarcerated male identity is one that we want to talk about at this time. What happens is that when one is incarcerated, one has to have a shift in what it means to be a man. Because a part of manhood is to be able to determine for yourself what you will do. Determine who you would do it with, and determine when you would do it and when you would stop. In the process of being incarcerated, all of those things are determined for you by somebody else. When you will wake up, when you will eat, what food you will eat, when you will go outside, when you will stay inside, right? Where you will sit, how you will breathe, when you can read, when you can study. All these things that we look at as a manhood moment are taken away when one is incarcerated. And so the incarcerated male identity becomes one of trying to redefine oneself in the context of actually being held in captivity physically. But I want to submit to you that the real captivity is not in one that is physical. The real captivity or incarceration is one of the mind. That when the mind has been incarcerated, then that's when you have a real problem. So even though one can be incarcerated physically, if the mind is always free to move into a space where it can see possibilities, that even when it's released from the space of physical incarceration, it still is expansive because it goes back into an environment where it's able to express its expansiveness. Dr. Carter G. Woodson said it this way. He says that when you control a man's thinking, you don't worry about his actions. You'll tell him to come here, to go there, he will find his place and he will stay in it. The idea here is that when one's thoughts are under control, then the actions have been actually sublimated by somebody else. So the incarcerated male identity is that when one begins to operate under the position of being passive and submissive to someone else, and that is a breach of the identity of what it means to be man. But in reality, the physical incarceration is not the issue in totality. The real issue is that can your mind continue to conceptualize a reality beyond the space of confinement? And when the mind can conceptualize that, then one is free to be male and free to be man, even when there's physical incarceration. The freedom comes when you know that no matter where I find myself, I am still a being. I'm still man. I still have capacity to do those things. I may not do those things the way that I want to do them, but I'm still making fundamental choices in this space. And I will make more choices outside of this space. I've been places where men have had some of the most profound study groups, more profound activities where they created rites of passage groups inside of prison. They have they've studied, they have graduated from high school and college. They've created this space where they were able to be free in the moment of incarceration. That the freedom is really in the dome. The dome is the head. So the free dome is when you are able to live liberated in your intellectual space. In moments of communication, there is a sender and there is a receiver. There is one who gives and there's one who has to take. Communication means that there is a process of a message that is going and moving and being responded to. In order to be effective, one has to be able to not only speak clearly, know their intentions, but also be able to hear and listen. Oftentimes we think about hearing and we hear many things in our environment. We hear things in the background. But listening requires one to stop and to attend. Attend means that you stop and you pay attention to what's going on in the moment. What's in the words what's in the words that have been spoken? What is happening? So you attend to details. So many times we hear, but we really do not listen. Communication means that we are giving, we're receiving, we're sending messages, and we're able to stop and to attend deeply to a variety of the word. So we can talk about communication. We talk about the issue of attending to the utterance. When I talk about the utterance of the words, I think about what the Dogon suggested are dimensions of the word. There is word from the front, there's word from the side, word from the back, and the clear word. That they suggested that there's word at face value, what somebody says, what somebody intends, what somebody means, and what they really are trying to communicate, what they are communicating. And so in communication, we have to be able to attend on multiple levels. The first thing is to be able to be open to communication. If someone is talking, one must not only hear the words that they're saying, but one must also listen. Listen with intentionality, listen to understand, listen to be able to express, listen to share. When one is communicating, one must be able to speak with a degree of clarity, to speak with power, to speak from a space of comfort, to speak from a place of ease, to speak from a place of truth. And in that, one can be able to communicate effectively with someone else. Oftentimes in communication, one person may desire to be heard over another person. That one talks over someone else when something is said that they don't agree with. And that then begins to create more problems. There's a proverb that suggests that all people desire to be heard, even the fool that you find at the grindstone. And if you argue with that person at the grindstone, nobody knows which one of you are the fool. And so we have to recognize that there is a process that if you are engaged in the process of communication and that only you are trying to be heard, then you're really not communicating at all. That you cannot talk over one another in communication. You must actually engage in listening and receiving from one another. And if you hear something that you're not comfortable with, sometimes stop and understand what it is that you may not be comfortable with. That's a difficult process that requires a level of emotional maturity. And sometimes people may say things that are hurtful from their mouths. That is also what we do, because we find ways to hurt when we feel that we've been hurt. And so when it becomes a conversation where there is a lot of tension, there's a lot of hurt that goes back and forth through the word, and then nobody is hearing one another at all. But it is imperative to stop, to hear, and to listen. And that is to stop. If somebody is talking loudly with someone else, then somebody has to stop and fold their arms. Another book of the book of Tower Tip says, if you come to somebody and the person is stronger than you, you don't fight with them. You stop and fold your arm. If somebody is weaker than you, you stop and fold your arms. If somebody is equally your strength, you stop and fold your arms, because in the first case, you'll lose because they're stronger. Second case, you'll win. Nothing has been gained. And the third case is that you will tie, and you will simply be in the same place that you were before you got started. So in communication, it is important to be able to not to try to win every time, but it's the best thing in communication is to try to be able to, or to actually not try, to engage in the process of understanding. And some say even overstanding what is being intended, and also what is being actually communicated. Because everyone desires to be heard, everyone has a position, and everyone desires and deserves to be respected.
So Dr. Washington, give an example of that. If you and I are in a conflict and both of us want to be heard, give me a concrete example of what should happen?
In a situation where people are together and two people want to be heard at the same time, one person must make a decision to stop and to listen, or to even stop and to step away and say that when I can hear you, I'll be able to step back into this conversation. That is the idea of emotional maturity. Because emotional immaturity means that we will get into a battle, we'll go back and forth, and have a tantrum like 2-year-olds. But to be able to step aside and to be able to say, wait a minute, what is being said right now is not against me. It is not going to tear me down. If I listen, I may hear something that may actually move me to my next better. It may push me into a position where I can actually grow and to become a better person. And that takes maturity to be able to get there. So a concrete example is that somebody says something that you don't like to hear, rather than simply fire back on the person, just stop and listen to understand what is it that was really said here. Maybe even ask the question, why do you say what you say? What is it about this that you want me to hear that I'm not hearing? What is it that I've done in the past that warrants this particular response? Because many times people actually operate from a position of past hurt and pain. Also, if you begin to speak to someone where you're cutting them off, or you're beginning to engage in the process of offending them, actually that's coming from too within yourself. because you have to recognize that sometimes you may be coming from a place that is not a very, I don't want to say healthy place, but you're coming from a place of hurt. And that place of hurt means that you were trying to protect something. And you're protecting what? And it's important to know that oftentimes we can get into a position of trying to protect some parts of ourselves because we don't want to be hurt again. And that hurt, it may not often be coming from the person that we think is trying to hurt us, but that hurt is coming from another place that is based on past pain. So we never let past pain block future gain. So in understanding future gains, you must understand then that to be able to hear someone and to hear them deeply, to listen to the words and hear them with intentionality, means that you are able to grow into a space where you can become a more vibrant person because you've learned some lessons from another person. In resuming your role in the household, the question becomes, what is your role? What was your role before you left? And what does the community need you to be? And these must be harmonized in order for there to be a successful reunion in the household. So resuming your role means that you come back into a space where you begin to assume a position not of your own thinking, but you assume one that the community needs you to be at the same time. Read means to go back. Zoom is to actually move into. So it is to go back and move into a space that is organic. Organic means that it morphs, it grows. So in resuming your role, the question is, what is it that I need to be? What is it that the community needs me to be? And is that the real truth? Or Frantz Fanon asked the question this way. He said, who am I? Am I who I say I am? And am I all I ought to be? The question is, who am I in this new space? This new space that I'm going back into. I have had experiences. I've had experiences of being incarcerated. I've had experiences where my rights were violated in many ways in a space. And now I'm coming back into a space where somebody has felt like they have been denied of my presence. And so all of these things are coming together in one space. So how do you resume a role? It's not always to go back into the same role, but it's to go back into a role that the community needs you to be in at this time. I don't need, someone would suggest, I don't need a daddy to get me a lollipops. I need a father to show me something about manhood because I'm going to get married. And in one case I remember having is that one person was in a space and they were learning to become, they were in a halfway house where they were going back home, and it came into our session crying. And he said, well, why is this man crying in front of other men? And he said that because my daughter desires for me to give her away at her wedding. And they said, well, why is that a problem? He says, but I didn't raise her. I wasn't there. And so the community says, but what she needs from you right now is your presence to resume a role as a father. She never did not see you as not being her father. She always saw you as that person. You did not raise her. That was not your doing role. But right now she desires for you to be, which is a very feminine space. She desires for you to be a man in her life to help her now from this point forward because you're going to be there. But also she's helping to raise you into your manhood. So the role process is not simply a unidirectional process. It is one that is bidirectional. It is one that the community will tell you what it needs, and you can also tell the community what you need from them. And so the role is not defined by one person. The role is defined in the context of community. Our children can teach us various aspects of adulthood. For example, I am the father of daughters. I've never been the father of daughters at this age before today. My mother is a mother of a son who has daughters of a certain age. So we're all growing up at the same time. So at some level, I'm forcing my mother to grow into her grandmother role that she's never been in at this time in her life because everything is happening to us in a new moment. And so we're shifting and growing at all times. So we must recognize that children come to raise us to a position of parenthood. A spouse raises us to a position of a spouse. The community raises us to a certain level of whatever it needs us to be because it needs us to be that. So we must understand that we are raised as we also do the raising because we also have experiences that we share with our children. We have experiences that we share with our spouse and some with our community. And so in that process, there is what's called reciprocity. that there's an exchange between us and the environment that allows us all to be better if we're able to open and receive the lessons that we have to receive.